I was just so intrigued by what I was seeing that I thought, wait a minute, I can be a part of this? I thought that you had to have a finance degree, or I thought you had to be like super wealthy and you had to be invited into the special rooms and things like that.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is Katana Abbott, and I want to welcome you to the show Smart Women Talk. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever wished you could use your money, no matter how much you have, to help create meaningful change in the world? Maybe it's supporting women founders, women entrepreneurs. It could be backing innovations for real problems, aligning your money with your deepest values. So if that's true, you're in the right place, because today's conversation, we're going to show you exactly how powerful your dollars can be. So I'm absolutely thrilled to share with you Marcia Dawood, and she is the author of Doing Good While Doing. She is the host of the Angel Next Door podcast. And Marcia is a global leader in angel investing. So you may have heard that word before, and we're going to learn a lot more about what that means and what it could mean for you. So today we're talking about how anyone, and this includes you, could invest in the change you want to see in the world, and why women are uniquely wired to be extraordinary investors. So, Marcia, I'm so thrilled to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, for coming on our show. And I had the privilege of seeing you speak live on your TED Talk, and it was so touching. And so I just thought, for our listeners and for those watching us on YouTube, if you could just share a little bit about your story and how you got involved in this, because I think that story that you shared may have something to do with how this happened. I find that all of us have some kind of story, and that because everything that happens in our past, it seems it's leading us to where we need to go. It could be good or bad.
That's exactly right. I completely agree with you. So I was working in corporate America for many years, and I was like doing the same thing and expecting different results. It happens when you get into a routine. And I was invited to an angel investing meeting. And I remember thinking to myself, cool, what is that? I have no idea what that means. I thought maybe we were going to pick stocks, or maybe we were going to do something. I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea what angel investing was. And I went to the first meeting. I was living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at the time, and I met some entrepreneurs who were local. And I thought, wait a minute, where have I been? I feel like I've been living under a rock, because there is innovation and entrepreneurship happening right in my own backyard, and I had absolutely no idea. And it turns out that angel investing is essentially when people use their own money in order to invest in an early stage private company. So a lot of people hear about public companies. You hear about stock market and things that's in the news a lot. You don't hear that much about private companies. So I really had no idea what was going on. It seemed very kind of daunting, a little bit overwhelming at first. And I was invited in and basically was very welcomed. And I was just so intrigued by what I was seeing that I thought, wait a minute, I can be a part of this? I thought that you had to have a finance degree, or I thought you had to be like super wealthy and you had to be invited into the special rooms and things like that. But that is actually not the case. And things have changed so much, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, that now anyone can invest really for as little as about $100 if they want to, through what's called equity crowdfunding. And we can get into that in a minute. But when I say anyone, you do have to have like internet access and like a bank account or a credit card. So I always like to specify that. But for the most part, I was just so fascinated by what I was seeing. And I thought, does this happen everywhere? Are there really entrepreneurs in every city and every town? And it is absolutely true. There are people right in your own backyard making innovations, and you may be very interested in what they're working on.
So I heard angel investing and entrepreneurs, and you were saying this is private. How is this different than what we hear as private equity?
Okay, so by definition, this is private equity. You are buying equity. Essentially, you're buying ownership. Equity equals ownership in a private company. In lingo, when we say private equity, that usually means the big private equity firms. Okay, and what they're doing is they're taking ownership stakes in companies, and then they go in a lot of cases and they become the management and they do a lot of those things. Okay, that's nothing about what we're doing. Okay. Angels, we might provide some mentorship. These are much, much smaller companies. And these smaller companies need capital and they need other things, mentorship. They need expertise. They need Rolodex opening, really. They need connections. They need people to help introduce them to where they're trying to sell their product or service. So that's really the biggest difference between when I think of private equity, I think of the big private equity firms. But by definition, private equity means equity in a private company.
Wow. Okay. So, because I have invested in private companies, and sometimes those companies don't make it.
Correct. Yes. So it is a risky asset class. We call it an asset class. It's just basically another place that you can put money and make an investment. Because it's private, it is not regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission to the level that a public company would be regulated. There are many more private companies in our country and in our world than there are public companies. If the SEC tried to regulate every private company, which I'm sure they'd love to do, they'd really be unrealistic. So it's like buyer beware. You really have to take everything with a grain of salt and make sure that you're doing your own diligence and really looking at the company and the opportunity before you make a decision. That's why in most cases, angels invest in groups. So you will hear about angel groups throughout the country. And actually, you can pretty much just do an online search and find angel groups in your area, city or town, and be able to find other like-minded people who might want to invest alongside of you. I always encourage investors to invest with a group and not solo. Unless you have oodles and oodles and oodles of money, you really don't want to do that. You want to invest with other people because between all of you, then in the group, you would be able to really take a good look at the company and see if it was a viable investment. The other thing I'll mention when you said about risk is you want to have a diversified portfolio, meaning that you want to invest in multiple companies. You don't want to take all your eggs and put them in one basket. So what we say, I'm part of the Angel Capital Association, which is the basically a national U.S. society for angel investors. And we basically say that you should really only invest maybe 5% of your investable assets into private companies like this.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where someone can get in trouble if they get excited and they put half of the retirement plan in.
Yes, exactly. So if you think about it, the SEC does regulate this asset class one way, which is by what's called the accredited investor definition. Now, that name sounds a little big and, I have to have an accreditation, meaning a lot of people might think, I have to take a test. No, it essentially means that you have to have a certain level of income or net worth in order to invest. So $200,000 if you're solo, $300,000 if you're including a spouse, that's for income, or $1 million in net worth minus your home. Now, that is if you're making a direct investment into a company. And like I mentioned before, for the $100 thing, that's equity crowdfunding. We'll talk about that in a minute, but let's just talk about this for a second. So essentially, to your point earlier, you don't want grandma or anybody to say, wow, that deal looks so good. I want to invest. I'm going to take all my money and put it into that. Don't do that. It's like going to the casino and betting on like black or something. No, don't do it. That is where the SEC comes in and says, listen, to make a direct investment like that into a company, you do have to have a certain level of income or wealth. It's a protection for investors.
Yeah, I think that's great. So let's just talk a bit about this whole idea of angel investing and there being a meeting and a group. That sounds very welcoming and like an opportunity to educate yourself.
Yeah.
And then to be able to, again, invest with your values. You find something that you really care about. And the other thing that you mentioned was being able to provide your skill set, maybe through mentorship or introductions.
Yep.
Can we go a little bit deeper on there? Because I think that could add a little bit of clarity too.
Sure. I got involved in the Pittsburgh Angel group that I was first invited into. And like I said, at first I did feel a little bit intimidated. I thought, there's talking about terms I don't know. I've never invested in this space before, but like you said, it's very welcoming. And they are very encouraging of you not making an investment right away. Learn first, then make an investment. Because what ends up happening is, and it sounds like maybe it wouldn't, but it does. And I've talked to a lot of angel investors, is you meet the entrepreneur and like you fall in love because you're like, oh, they're doing something so wonderful and I like them so much. And of course I want to invest in them. Okay. But you have to do your diligence. You have to take your time. You don't want to just jump into something right away. That was one of the mistakes I made, which is really why I started the podcast and why I wrote the book, Do Good While Doing, because I wanted people to not make the same mistakes I did. So it's like my brain dump on don't do this, but probably this is kind of a better idea type thing. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about going down a rabbit hole, sometimes that happens where you'll be like, oh, I love this, but you really have to be careful there. Now, in my TEDx talk from when I spoke at TEDx Charlotte in 2022, and in there, I tell the story about how we lost my mother to ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, in 2018. And one of the things that I've been very passionate about is, are there treatments, cures, anything that can help this horrible disease? I don't know that they actually call it an orphan disease, but it is a disease that affects less people than, let's say, heart disease or cancer. So it doesn't get the level of attention that you might see other types of diseases get. So I am very keen to finding the entrepreneurs who are out there working on something like this. And so that's a good example of you invest with your heart and you really want to help them. So then to your point about expertise, I don't have an expertise in science, all right, or healthcare, but I tend to love and gravitate toward these types of companies. So I'm going to want to surround myself with the people that do have this level of expertise, people who were doctors before or are doctors now. Maybe they retired, maybe they didn't, but they really have a level of connection and potentially they can really take a look at the science in a different way. So that's one of the things that I particularly gravitate toward. And I think in a lot of cases, people, when they look at, oh, I want to do good and do well, the do good part is I want to find the things that I really care about and that I relate to. And yes, we do hope to get a financial return. Now, if you're in it solely for the financial return, maybe you want to go a different direction, right? But I found that there are a lot of things that you can do to help advance science in order to advance the things that you care about, in order to help underrepresented founders like women, people of color, be able to get the funding that they need in order to create businesses, create jobs. These are things that are important to me. So I don't know that we always want to look at an investment. And I know we've been trained this way, that I know that our brains think like this, but we don't necessarily want to look at an investment and say, I only care about the return. I need to know, will I make money on this deal? Yes, of course, we do want that. But there's a whole other component when it comes to these very early stage companies and trying to help them really look at what they're trying to do and can they get there and what do they need besides money to get them there.
And with some of these, if you're talking about healthcare and if there's things with patents and clinical trials, it could take 10 years. And so you have to have a long range vision for it too and have the patience for it.
Exactly.
So it sounds a little bit like Shark Tank in a way.
It is.
So like one of the meetings, would there be people that are pitching their ideas and then there's the audience of the potential investors?
100%, except that Shark Tank has done a great job of letting people know what this even is or what it's like. But one thing that you don't see is all the diligence and all of the conversations that happen behind the scenes. So the sharks are very smart and they aren't going to necessarily make an offer to a company as quickly as what on TV. Right there, there's going to be a lot more people involved. There's going to be a lot of conversation. For TV, they want to show, hey, here's a company and here's how much is going to be invested in the company. And that is exactly what happens. Like people are trying to take a percentage of ownership in order for a certain amount of money. A lot of times they're like, doo-doo. The company walks in and they're like, they're giving away 15% of their equity for $300,000 or whatever the numbers are. And so that's exactly what that means. That's like they're basically trying to get money in order to give away part ownership of that company.
So is that what's happening with angel investing? Is they're making part of their company available to this group of angel investors? Are they working like a mutual fund where if you're in a group, they're going to have lots of different offerings, or?
No. So basically, the company has an offering. They're saying, hey, I'm trying to raise a certain amount of money, and I'm willing to give away a certain amount of ownership in my company. So the angel group, the only reason they'd work in a group is A, for what I said before, in order to vet the company, but also they can pool their resources. So one person probably can't give the company the type of money that they're looking for. Sometimes they're looking for upwards of $1 million. So one person being able to do that is probably going to be pretty rare.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
Yeah. So now they're pooling. Yes, they're pooling the
okay.
money together. Yeah, it's okay. I see where your analogy was. Yes. So yes, it's like you're basically pooling the money together so that you can invest as a group.
Okay. And so they may need $1 million for one company, but does the group have like multiple companies that they're invested in too? And so
Yes.
someone they could do as little as $10,000, or?
It depends on the group. It depends on the company that's being invested in. For the most part, whenever the pooling of the money happens, that's when you decide what the minimum is.
Yeah.
And usually it isn't just one angel group either. So a company may go around and pitch to 20, 30 angel groups or funds. A fund is where you actually have a manager of the money. So let's say I was like, I don't have time to be doing all this diligence and going to meetings and all that kind of stuff. I could just say, here's some money, and the fund manager would then make all the decisions. So there's a lot of that goes on too. But the companies could have to pitch to many different groups or funds, and then maybe 5 or 6 of them would make up that $1 million.
Okay.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, no, that does make sense. So that's the idea of the pooling and that. So one of the things that you talk about is how women entrepreneurs, women founders make up such a small percentage of this whole angel investing, private equity. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So when we talk about venture capital, that's basically, it's like angel investing, but it's a little bit a higher level. So let me just tell you the difference real quick between venture capital and angel investing. Angel investing is investing in a private company, but you're using your own money. You're basically investing out of your own checkbook. Okay. A venture capitalist is a little bit like that fund manager that I just mentioned, because a fund manager could be at an angel level, but venture capital is where there's bigger firms that have a lot more money and they are getting other people's money to invest. So that's the biggest difference between venture capital and angels. So with VCs, they're going to take a look at companies and they're going to come in at a much higher dollar amount. Sometimes they can invest millions of dollars at a time, a venture capital firm. Venture capital money is only about 2% of that money actually goes to women. Now, think about this. Women, we're like 50% of the population. You can't tell me that we only have 2% of the good ideas, right? So how can we start to change this? We've started to make a dent at angel level. And it has to start at the beginning, right? And the reason why is, and I put it in my book also, I believe that you need to have funders that look like the founders we want to help, right? So if we're saying, hey, we want more money to go to female founders, then we need to get more female funders. And at angel level, we've done a pretty good job over the last 10 years or so of educating more women and getting them to feel comfortable in this space so that they'll participate. At the venture capital level, which is a lot bigger dollars and bigger firms, and now they're managing other people's money, those are primarily, even to this day, led by men. And we're trying very hard to get more female fund managers, more female venture capitalists, but it's just going to take time to get to the big dollars. And so that's where that discrepancy is. In angel world, I think we've gotten it up to maybe 25-30% of the money goes to women. But at the big dollar level that really matters, and how they're going to grow and scale a company, we really haven't moved the needle on that 2%.
Okay, so then if this money's not going to these female entrepreneurs, these female founders, how in the world are they growing their businesses? Where do they get their funding? Do they have to go to family and friends and the bank and mortgage their homes? Talk about this problem we have because of that.
Yes. So in a lot of cases, you will see that women don't they're not able to grow businesses to be the size that we see their male counterparts grow. Yes, they do have to start with friends and family. They have to come up with other creative ways to fundraise. That might include equity crowdfunding, using philanthropic capital. These are all things I go into in the book. We probably need a whole other podcast episode to go through all of that. But it really does require some creativity. Women, though, I will tell you, female founders tend to be scrappier than most founders out there just because they have to be. They really have to take a dollar, stretch it farther. All the studies that have been done so far, their revenues usually come in higher. Their expenses are less. Their profitability is better. Female founders are a good bet. The problem is you need to make sure that they're surrounded by enough funding in order to help their companies to grow. And that is really the meat and potatoes of the mission I'm on, is how do we get more people to help back these companies so that they don't run out of money. The number one reason these companies fail is because they literally simply run out of cash. So how do we get that not to happen? Imagine if there was a world where a lot of people were using a little bit of money to help them instead of just a couple people using a lot of money. So that's the world that I'm imagining. Could we get people to not only back them with money and the capital requirements, but could we get them to back them with their expertise, their networks? Could that help them get a deal with a big box store or whatever it is that they need help with? That is the kind of world that I want to live in.
Yeah, and you've mentioned it a couple of times about the networks.
Yes.
So it's the education for women too. And this idea, it's not just who you know, it's who they know. Because out of the 5 people you might have, they each know 5 who know 5. And it's being able to, you're right, to get into that. And you just never know where someone's going to be able to connect you to the ideal person or company or funding that they need. And so you would, before we get into this crowdfunding, you mentioned a couple of times of finding the wealthy donors, the women. I'm thinking that I've worked in philanthropy quite a bit, raised millions of dollars that way for nonprofits. And there's all these women now that are managing these foundations and these assets. So have you gotten the message out, or do you have contacts for connecting with these women who everything they're doing is philanthropy, but they are not aware of this other level of support for women?
Yeah, so definitely there needs to be an awareness of the ability to invest, just letting them know that is a possibility. But what I'm finding is, and most recently I've been talking a lot about this, I've been quoted in a couple of Forbes articles, is that women can use, or anybody can use, philanthropic capital to invest in a for-profit company. And like I said, we could do a whole podcast episode on just this. But the way it works is sometimes people have what's called a donor advised fund, right? So they put philanthropic capital into a donor advised fund. In our country alone, there are hundreds of billions of dollars sitting in donor advised funds. And in most cases, they're going to be invested in mutual funds or maybe some public stocks or something like that as they're waiting to be deployed to their 501c3 or charity of choice, right, by the donor. That money, if it is put through like an impact custodian, they can actually use that money in order to invest into a for-profit company. It does get a tiny bit complicated, but it's actually quite simple at the end of the day. What happens is then if there is a gain, let's say that the company does really well, and there's an exit, the money would go back into their donor advised fund, but it would never go back to the donor. So that's the biggest difference. However, I think it's a triple win, right? Okay, first of all, the person who's making the donation, if that's something they're very comfortable with, let's say, and a lot of women are very comfortable with philanthropy, which is great. But now imagine that you are making your tax deductible donation, and then you're able to say, hey, I would like to help this female founder. So win 1, you get your deduction. Win 2, you're helping a female founder. Win 3, let's say that company ends up doing well and money gets put back into your donor advised fund. Now, instead of having, let's just say whatever your original amount was, now you have double that in order to give out to other charities. I believe that we put a lot of burden on charities to save the world, solve all the problems. And they don't really have the capital in order to do that. It's not fair to place that type of burden on them. So how can we help them? So this is one of the creative ways we could do that.
Wow. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And you're right, there's so much money. Fidelity, Schwab,
Oh,
all
yes.
these organizations, they have these donor advised funds, and the financial advisors suggest their clients put the money in. But one donor that I worked with, when she made her first donation, had no idea how she would use that money. But oh my gosh, over time and doing the research and going and getting involved in visiting these organizations, she is very mission driven now, and she's made such an impact.
That's amazing. Love
Yeah.
it.
So it's real exciting. So one thing I wanted to ask you about too, do you see some of the angel investors using their IRA but changing it to what's called self-directed IRA?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that way they can, because that's how I did it when I was very young.
Yes. In fact, I write about that in the book. Self-directed, it's very easy to move or change custodians, take wherever your IRA is right now and move it into a self-directed IRA. There's no tax implication. You don't have to worry about that or penalties or anything. And then you can then direct that into a private company through that new custodian.
Yeah, very interesting. So lots of options.
Lots of options. Yes. And that's my mission is, okay, yes, I want to educate people on this asset class. Okay. And that alone, a monumental feat. Okay. We want to make sure people feel comfortable, that they feel like it's not so overwhelming. But if I can also say, hey, there's these other things that you can do. There's other ways that you can invest. And you don't have to say, I have to write a check out of my checkbook. Because a lot of people are like, I'm cash strapped. I have investments. I have this, but I also have a house. I got kids. I got all these things that I got to save for college. All this stuff that they're trying to do, which I totally get. So how could they dip their toe in the water? What could they do in order to really look at the things that they care about and see if there is a way that they could help some of these companies? The other way, which I mentioned before, equity crowdfunding, is essentially a different type of pooling. We talked about pooling before to make a direct investment. This is like through a platform, and there are 3 platforms that have the majority market share right now. But if you just went to do an online search of equity crowdfunding platforms, a whole bunch of them would come up. You could pick which one you wanted to look at. And if they're raising money, go onto one of these platforms. And essentially, it's like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, if it was something which is rewards-based crowdfunding. Something like GoFundMe is a donation-based crowdfunding. Okay. This is for equity, meaning that you're going to get a very small, it's going to be small, especially if you're only investing $100. It's going to be a small piece of ownership into the company in order to help this company grow. Now, this is a great way, I believe, for entrepreneurs to raise money, especially underrepresented entrepreneurs, if they have a product or service that is something that the public uses. So let's just take a vitamin or something like that, or something that people could buy, could be a soft drink, whatever. They could put that type of a product. Now they're getting investors who will want to be customers. They're getting customers who will want to be investors. And now together they can really start to validate the market and make sure that this is a product or service that's really wanted before they go and raise really big money and now they're upside down, which can happen. And they are able to get people to really feel like they're a part of the company and help them to grow and scale.
Can you give us an idea of some of the companies, the types of businesses that you've seen becoming available on this platform of angel investing, and give us an idea of what the company was, what they did, and how people may be invested into it?
So the biggest thing that an angel or any investor would be looking for in a private company and investing in a private company is scalability. That is the number one thing we're looking for. So let's just say, for example, that somebody was saying, hey, I want to start a coffee shop in my neighborhood. That is not a scalable business. You're not going to become Starbucks overnight. That's not happening. It's just going to be like, if it's a local store, that isn't something that we're going to see take over the world. So what we want to see is something that will have some type of major impact. And the big areas are, of course, technology. We see, and right now, AI, artificial intelligence, is very hot. There are a lot of AI companies out there. I get a little bit nervous just because a company still needs to be solving a big problem. They can't just say, oh, we have this AI, great technology. That doesn't mean that you're going to be the next big winner. But technology is a big one. Healthcare is the other one. And then consumer products. Those are the three areas that in a lot of cases, it depends on the company, but in many cases, we can see a path to scalability. And that's where you'll see angels come in. That's when you'll see equity crowdfunding really making sense if you're seeing a company that has that scalability factor.
So with the equity crowdfunding, is that something for just like most listeners that might be
100%.
the first?
So for example, the three big players are WeFunder, Start Engine, and Republic. They're the three big guys in the space. One of the things that I like to tell people is two ways to get started. But when it comes to equity crowdfunding, go and look at some of the different companies. And you can even, this is a great family activity, I think, and go make a mock portfolio. Don't use any money. Don't even use $100. Don't use any money at first. Just learn. Just scroll around and see what's out there. Look at the different companies. It's a great dinner table conversation, especially if you have kids. I used to do it with my stepsons all the time. We would talk about, hey, what do you like? What do you like? And then we would dig a little bit deeper. What does it mean? Oh, they're making this type of technology. What's it going to do? And then you can learn a lot on the site without having to invest a dime. All right. So that's a great way for people to just start to learn and understand the space a little bit better. The other thing is just to simply look for what is happening in your own neighborhood. Maybe there's a startup event. You could literally like online search startup events in and put in your city or town. And then maybe just go and meet other people. Entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial people, investors, the people who help them, they all tend to like gravitate, I've noticed, in various cities and towns. And they want to be together. They want to hang out and they want to get to know each other. And so that's a great way to learn too. Just go and check it out.
I'm very excited that you came on this show. To wrap up, would you just give us some steps that listeners can take to get started? And then I would love for you to also share how they can reach you. And I know you've got a gift for us too.
That's right. Yes. So a couple of things. Definitely to get started, I think you should find out what's going on in your local community. And if it's a very small town, maybe there's not a ton going on yet, but maybe there's a lot going on in the neighborhood next to you or something. But I will tell you, there is more going on in your local area than you probably realize. I know I was shocked. I was in Pittsburgh, and this was in 2012, and I was completely shocked to see what was going on. But I will tell you also, if you are near a university, universities tend to have a lot of entrepreneurial programs, and they also tend to have entrepreneurs pitch, and they sometimes even have their own angel group within the university. So that's something neat if you wanted to check that out. So that's easy. Just look around, see what's going on. Also, the free gift is if you go to my website, which is simply my name, marciadawood.com, and we'll put it in the show notes, and I'll spell it MarciaDawood.com. You can download a free workbook. It's a workbook that is tied to the Do Good While Doing Well. And in there is the exercise for the mock portfolio for equity crowdfunding too. There's more than just that, but that is one of the exercises I included because I just think it's so much fun. I love to hear stories of families sitting around the kitchen table, and instead of somebody's on their phone and nobody's talking about school or whatever the story is, you could actually get people to be interested in kind of what's going on and what's the latest thing that's happening out there. I know I learn from entrepreneurs every single day, and I think it's really fun.
Thank you so much, Marcia, for coming to our show and
Sure.
and offering the workbook. I'm glad that we connected, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And everyone, thank you for coming to the show. And if you want to connect with us deeper, feel free to go to joinsmartwomen.com. And when you do, you'll know who our guests are. You'll be invited to our new community, to our actual academy, and have access to our free course. So until our next show, go out and live with more purpose, passion, and prosperity.